I woke up one morning convinced my dead husband was in the kitchen making coffee. The smell was so real I could taste it on my tongue. I shuffled downstairs in my slippers, calling his name, only to find an empty room and a cold stove. That's when my son told me I was losing my mind. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Agnes Coleman, and I'm 83 years old. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. For 7 months, I lived in a chemical fog so thick I couldn't see my own life clearly. I thought dementia was stealing my memories, but the real thief was someone I trusted with my life. And he wasn't working alone. It started 2 years after my husband Frank passed away. We'd been married for 51 years, and losing him felt like losing half of myself. I began forgetting small things. Where I'd parked at the grocery store, whether I'd already taken my morning pills, the name of my neighbor's little terrier who barked every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. My son Robert noticed these lapses immediately. He'd always been attentive, but after Frank's death, his concern seemed to intensify. Every phone call began with questions about my day, my activities, my memory. What I didn't know was that his girlfriend Jennifer was coaching him on what to ask. "Mom, did you remember to lock the front door last night?" he'd ask, following a script Jennifer had prepared. "Of course I did," I'd reply, though sometimes I wasn't entirely sure. "What about your medication? Did you take it this morning?" I'd look at my pill organizer, trying to remember if I'd emptied Tuesday's compartment or if it had been empty all along. The questions continued for months, gentle but persistent. Robert would visit twice weekly, always with the same worried expression, always documenting my mistakes in a little notebook Jennifer had given him. She was a nurse at the local hospital, and she knew exactly how to make normal age-related forgetfulness look like something more serious. One Tuesday morning in March, I was struggling to remember if I'd already taken my blood pressure medication when Robert arrived unannounced. He found me standing in the kitchen, holding my pill bottle, staring at it with confusion. "Mom, this is exactly what I've been worried about," he said, his voice heavy with rehearsed concern. "You can't keep living alone like this. What if you overdose? What if you forget and take double doses?" I set the bottle down with shaking hands. "I just can't remember if I took it already. It's like my mind has holes in it." Robert sat down beside me at the kitchen table, the same oak table where Frank and I had shared thousands of meals. "I've been doing research with Jennifer, Mom. She's a healthcare professional, and she thinks we might be dealing with early-stage dementia." The word hit me like a physical blow. Dementia. The disease that had slowly stolen my mother's brilliant mind 20 years earlier, leaving her confused and frightened in her final years. "But Robert, I'm not that bad yet," I protested weakly. "I still drive. I still manage my finances. I just forget little things sometimes." "That's exactly how it starts," he said gently, repeating Jennifer's words. "The good news is, Jennifer has connections in the medical field. She's found a revolutionary treatment program called Memory Care Plus. They specialize in early intervention for seniors experiencing cognitive decline." He pulled a glossy brochure from his jacket pocket, professionally designed by Jennifer's cousin Marcus, who ran a small graphic design business. The cover showed elderly people smiling and engaged in various activities, their eyes bright with the clarity I felt was already slipping away from me. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell runs the program," Robert continued. "She's a neurological specialist who's had incredible success with patients just like you. Jennifer actually knows her from the hospital. The treatment involves specialized medications that can actually rebuild neural pathways and slow down memory loss." What I didn't know was that Jennifer had met Dr. Sarah Mitchell at an acting workshop 3 months earlier. Sarah was a struggling actress who'd been out of work for 6 months, desperate enough to take on any role that paid well. Jennifer had offered her $500 per visit to play the part of a medical professional, complete with fake credentials and a convincing backstory. I studied the brochure, trying to focus on the technical explanations and success stories, but the words seemed to swim on the page. "How much does something like this cost?" $8,000 per month, Robert said quietly. "I know it sounds like a lot, but Mom, we're talking about preserving your mind. Dad always said your nest egg was there for your health and well-being." $8,000. It was more than I'd spent on anything in years, but if it could keep me from disappearing into the fog of dementia like my mother had, wouldn't it be worth any price? "Jennifer has already spoken with Dr. Mitchell," Robert continued. "She's reviewed your symptoms and believes you'd be an excellent candidate for the program. She can start treatment as early as next week." Within 5 days, my new life began. Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived at my house on a Monday morning, carrying a professional-looking medical bag that Jennifer had purchased online and filled with props. She radiated the kind of confidence I associated with competent healthcare providers. She was probably in her 40s, with short gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made her look scholarly and trustworthy. "Mrs. Coleman, I'm so pleased to meet you," she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "Robert and Jennifer have told me about your concerns, and I believe we caught this early enough to make a real difference." Dr. Mitchell spent an hour asking questions about my symptoms, my family history, and my daily routines. She took notes in a leather-bound journal that Jennifer had coached her to use, nodding knowingly at my responses in exactly the way a real doctor might. "The pattern you're describing is textbook early-stage cognitive decline," she explained, using terminology Jennifer had taught her. "The confusion, the memory lapses, the disorientation, these are all signs that your brain is struggling to form and retrieve memories normally." She opened her medical bag and withdrew a bottle of large white pills. What I didn't know was that these were lorazepam tablets that Jennifer had been obtaining through her connections at the hospital, stockpiling them over several months by claiming various patients had anxiety issues requiring medication. "These are specialized neurotropic supplements designed specifically for patients in your situation," Sarah said, delivering Jennifer's carefully crafted lie. "They work by enhancing neurotransmitter function and promoting the growth of new neural connections." The pills were larger than any medication I'd taken before, with a chalky texture and bitter aftertaste that lingered long after swallowing them. Dr. Mitchell instructed me to take 2 pills every morning with breakfast and 1 additional pill each evening before bed. "You might experience some initial side effects as your brain adjusts to the new chemical balance," she warned, again repeating Jennifer's script. "Drowsiness, mild confusion, or disorientation are completely normal and actually indicate that the medication is beginning to work." Within a week of starting the treatment, I noticed changes, but they weren't the improvements Dr. Mitchell had promised. Instead, my confusion seemed to be getting worse. I would wake up in the afternoon with no memory of the morning. Sometimes I'd find myself in rooms of my house with no recollection of walking there. "This is part of the process," Dr. Mitchell assured me during her second visit, following the explanation Jennifer had prepared for this exact situation. "Your brain is essentially rewiring itself. The temporary increase in confusion is actually a positive sign that the neural pathways are being rebuilt." Meanwhile, Jennifer was monitoring my progress through Robert, adjusting the dosage and frequency of the medication based on how confused and compliant I appeared to be. She'd studied the effects of benzodiazepines extensively during her nursing training, and she knew exactly how to keep me disoriented without making me obviously ill. Robert visited more frequently now, often finding me in states of bewilderment that seemed to confirm his and Jennifer's manufactured fears about my condition. I'd mistake him for Frank, or ask him when his father would be coming home from work. The embarrassment was crushing. "Mom, maybe we should consider having someone stay with you during the day," Robert suggested, after finding me trying to make breakfast at 3 p.m., having put salt in my coffee and sugar on my scrambled eggs. I don't need a babysitter, I replied, though the words felt thick in my mouth, like speaking through cotton. It's not about babysitting. It's about safety, he said, using Jennifer's talking points. What if you fall and can't remember how it happened? What if you leave the stove on or forget to lock the door? This was all part of their plan. Jennifer had researched isolation techniques used by financial predators, and she knew that cutting me off from my normal support systems would make me more dependent on Robert and less likely to seek outside help or second opinions. Robert also began helping with my finances during this period, something Jennifer had identified as crucial for their long-term success. Mom, you're in no condition to be making complex decisions about money, he said gently, taking my checkbook and bank statements. Let me handle the bills and investments until the treatment starts working. I was grateful for his help. Numbers had become increasingly difficult to focus on, and I'd already made several mistakes trying to balance my accounts. What I didn't know was that Robert had been systematically transferring money from my accounts into a joint account he shared with Jennifer, always in amounts small enough to avoid triggering bank alerts. Don't worry about any of that, he said. Your only job right now is to focus on taking your medication and getting better. By month 3 of the Memory Care Plus program, my world had shrunk to the size of my house. I rarely drove anymore, afraid of getting confused and lost in my own neighborhood. Dr. Mitchell's visits became the highlight of my week, the only human contact besides Robert that felt purposeful. But I wasn't the only person being affected by this scheme. My neighbor, Dorothy Williams, had been watching the changes in my behavior with growing concern. Dorothy was a retired school principal with sharp observational skills, and she'd noticed that my confusion seemed to coincide perfectly with the arrival of the mysterious doctor who visited me twice weekly. Agnes, honey, are you feeling all right? Dorothy asked one afternoon when she found me standing in my front yard, looking confused and disoriented. You seem different lately. I'm getting treatment for my memory problems, I explained, the words feeling fuzzy even as I spoke them. My son found a wonderful doctor who's helping me. Dorothy frowned. What kind of doctor makes house calls these days? And why haven't I seen you at any of Dr. Peterson's appointments? Dr. Peterson had been our neighborhood physician for 15 years, and Dorothy knew he'd been taking care of me since Frank's death. This question bothered me more than I wanted to admit, but the medication made it difficult to hold on to complex thoughts for very long. By the time Robert arrived for his evening visit, I'd forgotten about Dorothy's concerns entirely. Meanwhile, Jennifer was becoming increasingly paranoid about maintaining their deception. She'd researched my financial situation thoroughly and knew I had substantial assets that would take months or even years to fully drain. But she was also aware that the longer the scheme continued, the greater the risk of exposure. We need to accelerate the timeline, she told Robert during one of their evening planning sessions. Your mother is still too alert sometimes. We need to increase the dosage and start pushing for power of attorney documents. Robert was hesitant. What if we push too hard and she becomes suspicious? Or what if someone else notices something's wrong? That's why we need to isolate her completely, Jennifer replied. No more visits from neighbors. No more phone calls from old friends. We tell everyone she's too sick for visitors, that social interaction aggravates her condition. They began implementing this isolation strategy immediately. When my sister Ruth called from Arizona to check on me, Robert intercepted the call. Mom's having a really difficult time right now, he told her. The doctor says phone calls and visitors are too stimulating for her brain. She gets confused and agitated afterward. Ruth was concerned but trusted Robert's judgment. Should I come visit? She asked. The doctor specifically advised against travel or major changes in routine. Robert lied smoothly. Maybe in a few months when the treatment has had more time to work. By month 4, Jennifer decided it was time to introduce a new element to their plan. She brought in her brother Marcus, the graphic designer who'd created the Memory Care Plus brochures. But Marcus would play a different role in the deception. "Agnes, I'd like you to meet Marcus Thompson," Dr. Mitchell announced during one of her visits. "He's a social worker who specializes in helping families navigate the challenges of cognitive decline." Marcus was in his 30s, professionally dressed, and carried himself with the same confident demeanor that made Dr. Mitchell seem credible. He'd done his homework, researching social work terminology and elder care procedures to make his performance convincing. "Mrs. Coleman, I understand you've been experiencing some challenges with daily living tasks," Marcus said, settling into Frank's old chair. "My job is to help your family make decisions about the level of care and support you might need as your condition progresses." This was the beginning of the next phase of their plan. Marcus would gradually convince me that I needed more intensive care, eventually leading to the suggestion that I sign power of attorney documents, giving Robert complete control over my finances and medical decisions. "Have you considered what might happen if your symptoms worsen?" Marcus asked during his second visit. "Your son is doing an admirable job caring for you, but he can't be here 24 hours a day. What if there's an emergency and you can't remember important information like your medication schedule or your doctor's contact information?" These conversations were carefully designed to increase my anxiety and dependence. Jennifer had studied psychological manipulation techniques, understanding that fear and confusion would make me more likely to surrender control of my life to people I trusted. But Dorothy Williams wasn't giving up her concerns about my situation. She'd been a school principal for 30 years, and she'd developed a keen sense for when something wasn't right with the people in her care. The dramatic change in my behavior, combined with the suspicious timing of my medical treatment, had set off every alarm bell in her experienced mind. Dorothy began keeping a log of my visitors, noting the days and times when the supposed doctor and social worker came to my house. She also started paying closer attention to Robert's behavior, and she noticed that he seemed more anxious and secretive than she'd ever seen him before. One afternoon, Dorothy decided to take direct action. She waited until she saw Dr. Mitchell leaving my house, then approached her in the driveway. "Excuse me, doctor," Dorothy called out. "I'm Agnes's neighbor, and I've been concerned about her condition. Could I ask what kind of specialist you are?" Sarah Mitchell, caught off guard by the unexpected encounter, stumbled over her response. I specialize in geriatric cognitive disorders," she said, using terminology she'd memorized from Jennifer's coaching sessions. "Which medical school did you attend?" Dorothy asked directly. "And are you board certified in neurology or psychiatry?" Sarah's face went pale. She hadn't been prepared for this level of scrutiny from a stranger. That's confidential patient information," she stammered before hurrying to her car. Dorothy watched her drive away, more convinced than ever that something fraudulent was happening to me. That evening, she called her daughter Linda, who worked as a social worker for the county's Adult Protective Services Department. "Mom, what you're describing sounds like a potential elder abuse situation," Linda said after hearing Dorothy's concerns. "But we need more evidence before we can intervene officially. Can you document specific incidents or behaviors that seem suspicious?" Dorothy agreed to continue monitoring the situation, but she also decided to take a more direct approach with me. The next morning, she knocked on my door, bringing a casserole and hoping to have a serious conversation about my medical care. "Agnes, honey, I've been thinking about your treatment," Dorothy said as we sat in my kitchen. "Have you gotten a second opinion from Dr. Peterson? It's always good to have multiple medical perspectives when dealing with serious conditions." The suggestion made sense, but when I mentioned it to Robert during his next visit, he became visibly agitated. "Mom, Dr. Peterson doesn't specialize in cognitive disorders," he said quickly. "Besides, Changing doctors in the middle of treatment could be dangerous. Dr. Mitchell knows your case history and medication schedule. Starting over with someone new could set back your progress by months. This response had been carefully crafted by Jennifer, who understood that any involvement from a legitimate medical professional would immediately expose their entire operation. But Dorothy's questions had planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Even through the medication-induced fog, I began to notice inconsistencies in the things Dr. Mitchell and Marcus told me. Sometimes their explanations for my symptoms contradicted each other. Other times, they seemed unfamiliar with medical terminology that I remembered from Frank's various health issues over the years. Month 5 brought the introduction of another player in Jennifer's elaborate scheme. She convinced her friend Lisa, who worked as a paralegal, to impersonate a legal professional who would help me prepare important documents for my family's future security. Mrs. Coleman, my name is Lisa Harper, and I'm an elder law attorney, she announced during her first visit. Robert and Jennifer asked me to visit with you about some important legal documents that might be beneficial given your current health situation. Lisa had been coached extensively by Jennifer about power of attorney procedures and estate planning terminology. She carried professional-looking legal documents that Jennifer had downloaded from the internet and modified to appear legitimate. Given your diagnosis, Lisa continued, it would be wise to execute a durable power of attorney that would allow Robert to make medical and financial decisions on your behalf if your condition deteriorates to the point where you can't make those decisions yourself. The documents she presented looked official and complicated, filled with legal language that was difficult for me to understand even without the medication affecting my thinking. Jennifer had specifically chosen complex terminology that would be confusing to someone in my drugged state. This is just a precautionary measure, Lisa assured me. The power of attorney would only take effect if you become unable to manage your own affairs. Until then, you maintain complete control over your finances and medical care. But this was a lie. The documents Lisa presented were designed to give Robert immediate and comprehensive control over every aspect of my life. Jennifer had researched the legal requirements carefully, crafting documents that would appear legitimate to bank employees and healthcare providers, while giving Robert unprecedented access to my assets. Meanwhile, Dorothy Williams had been conducting her own investigation into my supposed medical team. Using her computer skills and her daughter Linda's access to professional databases, she'd been trying to verify the credentials of Dr. Sarah Mitchell and Marcus Thompson. Mom, I can't find any record of a Dr. Sarah Mitchell who specializes in cognitive disorders in our entire metropolitan area, Linda reported during one of their phone conversations. And there's no Marcus Thompson registered as a social worker with the state licensing board. This information convinced Dorothy that her suspicions were correct, but she knew she needed concrete evidence of fraud before Adult Protective Services could intervene effectively. Dorothy decided to take a more aggressive approach. She began watching my house more carefully, taking photographs of my visitors, and writing down license plate numbers. She also started recording our conversations when I seemed lucid enough to answer questions about my medical treatment. During one of these conversations, I mentioned something that made Dorothy's heart race with alarm. The strangest thing happened yesterday, I told her during one of my clearer moments. I found pills scattered on my bathroom floor, but I couldn't remember dropping them. Dr. Mitchell says memory problems can cause clumsiness, but it seemed odd. What had actually happened was that I'd accidentally knocked over my pill bottle while heavily medicated, and in my confusion, I'd tried to clean up the mess. But some of the pills had rolled under the bathroom cabinet, where I couldn't reach them. Dorothy asked if she could see the pills I'd found, and I brought her the 3 tablets I'd managed to retrieve. She immediately noticed that they looked different from any medication she'd ever seen prescribed for memory problems. Agnes, do you mind if I take one of these to show my daughter? Dorothy asked. She works in healthcare, and she might be able to identify what kind of medication this is. Linda took the pill to a pharmacist friend who confirmed Dorothy's worst fears. It was lorazepam, a powerful sedative with no therapeutic value for memory disorders. In fact, long-term use of benzodiazepines in elderly patients was known to cause exactly the kind of cognitive impairment I'd been experiencing. Armed with this evidence, Dorothy felt confident enough to confront me directly about the situation. But she knew she had to time the conversation carefully, catching me during one of my more lucid periods when the medication effects were wearing off. That opportunity came on a Thursday morning when she noticed that Dr. Mitchell's car wasn't in my driveway at the usual time. Dorothy knocked on my door and found me looking more alert than I'd appeared in weeks. "Agnes, I need to tell you something very important," Dorothy said, sitting down at my kitchen table. "I don't think the people treating you are real medical professionals." Even through my medication-induced confusion, Dorothy's words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me had been harboring similar doubts. Dorothy explained everything she'd discovered. The lack of professional credentials for Dr. Mitchell and Marcus Thompson, the identification of my medication as a sedative rather than memory treatment, and her growing suspicions about Robert's behavior throughout my supposed illness. "I think someone is drugging you intentionally," Dorothy said gently. "The pills you're taking aren't helping your memory. They're destroying it. And I'm afraid the people doing this might have access to your finances." The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, with Dorothy patiently explaining the evidence she'd gathered while I struggled to process information that contradicted everything I'd believed about my medical care for the past 5 months. By the time Dr. Mitchell arrived for her regular appointment, Dorothy had convinced me to hide one of my morning pills instead of swallowing it. For the first time in months, I would experience a day without the full effects of the sedation that had been controlling my mind. That evening, as the medication began wearing off, my thinking became clearer than it had been since the treatment started. I began to remember details and experiences that had been buried under months of chemical fog. I remembered Dorothy's warnings about my medication. I remembered inconsistencies in Dr. Mitchell's explanations. And most importantly, I began to remember how sharp and clear my mind had been before this treatment began. That night, I made the decision that would ultimately save my life and my financial security. Instead of taking my evening dose of medication, I pretended to swallow the pills while actually hiding them under my tongue, then spitting them out once I was alone. For the first time in 5 months, I went to sleep with an unmedicated mind. I woke up the next morning feeling more alert and mentally clear than I had since beginning the Memory Care Plus program. The thick fog that had been clouding my thoughts seemed to be lifting with each hour that passed without additional sedation. But I knew I had to be extremely careful. If Robert, Jennifer, or any of their accomplices suspected that I was no longer taking the medication, they might escalate their efforts to gain control of my finances or force me into an institutional setting where I'd have no control over what drugs I was given. Over the next 3 days, I continued the careful deception of pretending to take my medication while actually disposing of the pills. Each day brought dramatic improvements in my mental clarity, memory, and overall cognitive function. On the 4th day, when Dr. Mitchell arrived for our regular appointment, I was ready with a plan Dorothy had helped me develop. I'd hidden a small digital recorder in my sweater pocket, positioned to capture our entire conversation. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Coleman?" Dr. Mitchell asked as she prepared my morning dose of pills. "Actually, I've been having some concerns about the medication," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I've been doing some reading on the internet, and I'm wondering if these pills might be causing more harm than good." Dr. Mitchell's expression shifted noticeably, becoming more guarded and defensive. "Mrs. Coleman, you really shouldn't believe everything you read online. These medications are specifically formulated for your particular condition. Regular sedatives like lorazepam wouldn't be appropriate for memory disorders at all. There it was. She'd just admitted, on tape, that she knew she was giving me lorazepam while claiming it was specialized memory treatment. I'm also concerned about the cost, I continued, following Dorothy's suggested script. Robert tells me we've already spent over $40,000 on this program. That seems like an enormous amount of money for treatment that appears to be making me worse instead of better. The treatment is expensive because it represents cutting-edge medical technology, Dr. Mitchell replied quickly, clearly becoming more agitated. But Robert and Jennifer understand that your cognitive health is worth any price. They've both been very dedicated to ensuring you receive the best possible care, regardless of cost. This was another crucial admission. Dr. Mitchell had just revealed Jennifer's direct involvement in my medical care, something that had never been explicitly acknowledged before. After Dr. Mitchell left that day, I played the recording back multiple times, making sure I'd captured clear evidence of her deception. Then I called Dorothy, who immediately contacted her daughter Linda at Adult Protective Services. "We have enough evidence now to begin an official investigation," Linda assured Dorothy. "But we need to move quickly before they realize their scheme has been exposed." That afternoon, while Robert was at work and before his usual evening visit, Dorothy helped me drive to my bank to check on my financial accounts. What we discovered there was even more devastating than I'd feared. My primary checking account, which should have contained approximately $45,000, had a balance of just $2,800. My savings account, where I'd kept Frank's life insurance money and our retirement investments, was completely empty. Over $320,000 had vanished. "Mrs. Coleman, your son Robert has been managing these accounts under power of attorney authorization," the bank manager explained apologetically. All withdrawals were properly documented and appeared to be for legitimate medical expenses. "I never signed any power of attorney documents," I said firmly, my voice stronger and clearer than it had been in months. "I want to see that paperwork immediately." When they brought the documents from my file, I stared at a signature that looked somewhat similar to my handwriting but was clearly a forgery. The papers were dated during my second month of treatment, when I'd been so heavily medicated that I could barely remember my own name from day to day. Dorothy took photographs of the forged documents with her phone while the bank manager made copies for our records. We also requested detailed statements showing every withdrawal over the past 5 months, creating a comprehensive record of the systematic theft of my life savings. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the conspiracy against me. It wasn't just Robert working alone. It was an elaborate network of accomplices, each playing a specific role in the deception. Jennifer had been the mastermind, using her medical knowledge to design a scheme that would incapacitate me psychologically while providing cover for massive financial theft. She'd recruited her boyfriend Robert as the inside family connection, her brother Marcus as the fake social worker, her friend Sarah as the phony doctor, and her paralegal friend Lisa as the fraudulent attorney. Police discovered that Jennifer had been researching elder fraud techniques for over a year, studying successful schemes from other jurisdictions and adapting their methods for my specific situation. She'd identified me as an ideal target because I was recently widowed, financially secure, and somewhat isolated from extended family members who might ask difficult questions. The scheme had netted them over $250,000 in just 5 months. Money they'd used to fund lavish lifestyles, including expensive cars, luxury vacations, gambling, and drug purchases. Jennifer had been planning to continue the fraud until my assets were completely exhausted, at which point they would have abandoned me in a state-run nursing facility. When police arrested the entire group 3 days later, their reactions ranged from defiant to pathetically remorseful. Jennifer showed no remorse whatsoever, telling investigators that elderly people were easy targets who wouldn't be around much longer anyway. Robert claimed he'd been manipulated by Jennifer, but evidence showed he'd been an eager and willing participant from the beginning. Sarah, the actress who'd played Dr. Mitchell, broke down completely during questioning, admitting that she'd known the scheme was illegal, but had been desperate for money after months of unemployment. Marcus and Lisa also claimed they'd been reluctant participants, but their enthusiastic involvement in forging documents and stealing my assets suggested otherwise. The legal proceedings stretched over 14 months, complicated by the multiple jurisdictions involved and the complex financial crimes that had been committed. Robert was ultimately sentenced to 6 years in state prison for elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and theft. Jennifer received 8 years as the scheme's mastermind. Sarah got 3 years with the possibility of parole after 18 months, due to her cooperation with the investigation. Marcus and Lisa each received 4-year sentences, with requirements to pay restitution from any future earnings. Through asset seizure, the sale of cars and jewelry purchased with my stolen money, and garnishment of the defendant's future wages, I eventually recovered approximately $140,000 of my stolen funds, but more than half of my life savings was gone forever, spent on luxury items and experiences that could never be recovered. More devastating than the financial loss was the psychological trauma of realizing how completely I'd been betrayed by people I'd trusted with my life. The recovery process required months of therapy, support group participation, and gradual rebuilding of my confidence in my own judgment and decision-making abilities. Dr. Williams, a legitimate therapist who specialized in elder abuse trauma, helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just theft, it was a form of systematic psychological torture designed to make me doubt my own sanity and surrender control of my life. Your son and his accomplices didn't just steal your money, Dr. Williams explained during one of our sessions. They stole your sense of reality, your trust in your own mind, your basic belief in your ability to take care of yourself. That kind of betrayal creates trauma that goes far beyond financial loss. Learning to trust my own cognitive abilities again was perhaps the most difficult part of my recovery. Even knowing that the confusion had been artificially induced through medication, I struggled with persistent doubts about every memory lapse, every moment of uncertainty, every small mistake in daily living. Dorothy Williams became my closest friend and strongest supporter during this recovery period. Her sharp instincts and willingness to investigate suspicious circumstances had literally saved my life and what remained of my financial security. I just couldn't stand by and watch someone hurt you, Dorothy told me months later. My years as a school principal taught me to recognize when something wasn't right, even when I couldn't immediately prove what was wrong. The experience also connected me with a community of elder abuse survivors I never knew existed. Through support groups and advocacy organizations, I met dozens of other people whose stories were remarkably similar to mine: adult children, caregivers, and supposed professionals who had systematically robbed and deceived vulnerable seniors. Now, 2 years later, I wake up each morning with profound gratitude for my recovered mental clarity and hard-won independence. I've learned to manage my remaining finances with the help of a legitimate financial advisor who comes highly recommended by my bank, not by family members with hidden agendas. I've also become an active advocate for other seniors who might be experiencing similar abuse. I volunteer with the local area agency on aging, sharing my story with bank employees, healthcare workers, police officers, and social service providers who might encounter other victims. The most important lesson I've learned is that elder abuse by family members is far more common than most people realize, accounting for over 60% of all reported cases. Adult children who see their parents' assets as their rightful inheritance often convince themselves they're doing what's best for everyone involved. But I've also learned that recovery is possible, even after devastating betrayal. With proper support, legitimate medical care, and time to heal, survivors can rebuild their lives and reclaim their independence. My house still holds Frank's presence in every room, but now those memories bring comfort and strength instead of confusion and doubt. I can think about our 51 years together with clarity and joy, knowing that those precious memories are real and mine to treasure. Tomorrow I'm having dinner with Dorothy and several other friends from our neighborhood support group. We'll share a meal, laugh about everyday things, and enjoy each other's company for reasons that have nothing to do with money, inheritance, or medical care. Just honest friendship, mutual respect, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my mind, scarred but intact, belongs entirely to me again. The woman who spent 7 months believing she was disappearing into dementia has learned to treasure every moment of mental clarity as the precious gift it truly is. And if sharing my story helps even one other person recognize the warning signs of this kind of systematic abuse, then perhaps some good will have come from those lost months of artificial confusion and manufactured helplessness. The truth, I've discovered, really can set you free, even when it's more terrible than any lie you've been forced to live with. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we trust most completely. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, there are also people like Dorothy Williams who care enough to ask difficult questions and refuse to look away when something doesn't seem right. That makes all the difference in the world.